you having to work, you having to give, you having to show up, you having to tell and explain, and do a lot of invisible labor to keep that relationship going. Hmm. Well, we're with the same group as last week. Thank you all again for being here. And today's session, is actually one that I had planned a little bit later on. But oh, okay. Yeah. So today's session is something that I had planned as a topic a little bit later on. But I really felt the strong urge to move it forward. And it's the topic of relationships taking work. And when I say relationships taking work, I'm not just saying, there's a investment that you have to make as a person in showing up, but more so being used to being the one who does all the work, being used to being the one who's maybe a little bit more responsible, more understanding, having certain standards, and dealing with people who, how do you say it, maybe leave things up to you. And because of that, you having to work, you having to give, you having to show up, you having to tell and explain, and do a lot of invisible labor to keep that relationship going. And when I put this program together, there were a few defining characteristics that I found in the people that I see fitting in this group. And I don't know if everybody is aware or familiar with these terms, but the terms that I defined this group as was hyper independent, perfectionistic, and the third one I constantly forget, but hyper independent, perfectionistic, and parentified. And what these terms mean, I'm going to shortly explain them. I'm not going to make it too long. So, I think that with perfectionism, a lot of people already know what that is. But for people who might not have a full picture of it, perfectionism can also show up in our relationships. And when perfectionism shows up in our relationships, it means that we feel the need or pressure to show up always in the relationship. So you might notice it when maybe you want to cancel on something because you feel really sick, but you feel like, oh no, I can't do that because I would let that person down. I would disappoint them. I have to always show up. And so there's this pressure of always needing to be reliable, always needing to be there, always needing to show up in a certain way and say the right things and support in the right way. And so there's a perfectionistic tendency in how you relate. And for some people, you might notice it if you're very attuned, that sometimes your interactions don't feel fully authentic, or they feel like you're wearing a mask. And another thing that you might notice it from is also when there's a certain way you feel like you have to show up. So maybe when somebody hurts you, you feel like, oh, I have to do X, Y, Z. And if I made a mistake in that X, Y, Z, it was bad. That's not acceptable. So there's a certain pressure you put on yourself when it comes to how you show up in your relationships. And it's a very high standard that you have for yourself. And then when it comes to the parentified part, people who are parentified often have a role reversal with their caretakers, with their parents. And so parents that you grew up with were maybe emotionally not that mature. And so you had to take on a responsibility or a certain maturity before you were old enough. So you had to take on certain responsibilities, certain yeah, you had to take on a certain role that made it so that your parent was actually the one who was in the child's role, and you were um, in the role of the parent. And a lot of immigrant parents and children will go through that, especially when immigrant parents move here and they don't master the language. You might know that you start to read letters when you're really young, or you are the one who's doing all the phone calls and the admin for your parents because they cannot show up in that role. That's also a little example of a role reversal where you take on the role of a parent and you are not in the role of a child, and your parent is basically the one who's being taken care of. So that's in a form of parentification, but parentification can show up in so many other ways. Then the hyper independence, and I want to say hyper independence in the sense that you are not used to feeling safe or being able to rely on others, and that fear of relying on others because probably the times that you did, you were let down, or yeah, like it wasn't something that you felt stable doing. So it becomes that you take everything on yourself, and you don't rely on others. You like make sure that you take the lead on everything, and other people rely heavily on you probably because you are so dependable. But on the other side and the other way around, it doesn't happen the same way. You don't get a reciprocal energy when it comes to being able to rely on others. And there's actually one more, like there's one more defining characteristic that I found, and that's the role of codependency, where there are so many lines blurring, emotional lines blurring, and a lack of boundaries. But I don't want to go into that so much because I don't feel like it's as important for the topic. Probably we will get into that in later sessions. But the things that I just mentioned now are the ones that I feel like are very important also to have in the back of our minds for today, knowing that these are probably the wounds that will be touched, and that sense of hyper independence and parentified and having to take on a lot of responsibility, and being the dependable, responsible one, and feeling as though some people are children you need to raise in the dynamic you have with them, and that taking a lot of energy. That's the one I want to focus on today. The reason being is that when we are used to having that relationship dynamic, we assume that relationships are work, and we don't trust that people can meet us where we are on the same level, and that being in any form of relationship, whether it be friendship or a romantic relationship, we always assume that the work that we're doing is part of it. That's just the norm. And therefore, we also like subconsciously seek partners who replicate that dynamic. And unknowingly, there's just a chronic fatigue that comes from it. So that's what I want to address today. Um, yeah, is there anything else that I want to say about this topic before I get into grounding? Let me see. And I also think it's fine if you want to comment on this right now. If you want to say something before I get into it, if you want to say something that comes up for you with this topic, feel free to do so. But I think it's a very important one, and I felt very called to push it forward, and not make this the topic for the fourth week. Mm, yeah, all points resonate extremely. Yeah. Okay, so I'm not going to talk too much. We're just going to get into it. Oh, there's another comment. Being with a child, being the caretaker, telling Like I have to do it. Yeah. Hmm. And it's also the sense of, like a lot of the times these people that we feel we have a parent child relationship with are very lovable people. They're not like annoying. Yeah, they are annoying in some ways. I'm sorry, but they're not assholes, let's say. And so you have a big heart for them, and you see them, and you also, and you also at the same time, I think that makes it so hard to kind of like part ways from relationships like that, because you also realize, hey, these are very lovable people. They have their hearts in the right place, and they don't mean to hurt or to harm me in any way. But it's just very hard to always be the one on the forefront, always be the one in the lead, and always be the one who's, yeah, like making things happen and dragging someone with you. And so, yeah, like that relationship pattern is a pattern that gets taught. That is something that we internalize in our system, and it doesn't have to be the norm for every relationship. And I think it's important that we let our system know that it's good and time to let go of this pattern. So, yeah, with that said, let's get ready.